Across the country, thousands of historic buildings tell the story of our island's history. Over time, some have been lost, others lovingly restored. But today, many more are at risk of collapse and being lost forever. But in such difficult economic times, can we really justify spending often huge sums of public money on the past when many would argue we should be spending it on investing in the future? That is the big challenge facing everyone involved in restoring England's heritage. The west of England is full of history and heritage. Its architecture speaks of classical design and engineering innovation. I'm Jules Hudson, and as an historian I've long been inspired by the passion of those who are struggling to keep Britain's heritage alive. Ordinary men and women who are doing whatever they can to save many of Britain's buildings at risk. I'm travelling across the west to see how those challenges are being met and how some treasures are being given a new life. But I'll also be asking why others are being left to deteriorate. It's now a decade since the BBC programme Restoration highlighted buildings at risk, and I'll be catching up with progress at places like Sherborne House in Dorset, and in the Somerset town of Bridgwater, one of the most distinctive buildings on the list, Castle House. It was commissioned as a home for the Ackerman family, but it's much more than just that. Built back in 1851, its creator John Board was fascinated with the use of new materials, many of which he was developing. And in many respects, Castle House was built to showcase what he thought could be achieved with concrete. It's one of the earliest surviving examples of modern reinforced concrete construction, but by 1998 it was in such a bad condition that English Heritage stepped in to stop it being knocked down. It was a cause célèbre in restoration, but I have to wonder whether its television appearances made any difference at all.
It was really important because even though a final solution hasn't been arrived at 9 years, 10 years later, it raised the awareness nationally about Castle House, and that's got to be a good thing. English Heritage have given us a large grant which we spent on urgent repairs internally. The reason it has to begin on the inside with Castle House is that there were cracks. If you just repair the outside without repairing the internal ceilings and floors, then it's just going to split again. It means that the work that's going on isn't visible yet, but it doesn't mean it's not happening.
In fact, there's more going on than just emergency work, and Castle House is benefiting from an unlikely source. As part of its work on a new nuclear power station at Hinkley, French energy firm EDF has pledged £230,000 to the concrete castle. And with the support of the local council, Clem and her team have been allowed to release yet more capital by selling the small plot of land next door. It'll be a while before work can start on the outside, but Castle House may yet have a future. That injection of capital should help to leverage yet more funding from places like English Heritage and the Heritage Lottery Fund. This may be one building that will finally come off the at-risk register. But of course, just as soon as one building comes off the at-risk register, another can soon take its place. Now, there are over 1,000 currently on the list across the UK, but a good chunk of them are here in the West. 109 altogether. Private homes and places of public worship, some in need of a new use, others at risk of collapse. They're structures we haven't properly cared for. But then why should we care about them now?
Once these buildings have gone, that's it, they're gone forever. You can't recreate them, and it's part of our national identity. The buildings that we highlight, the buildings on the Heritage at Risk Register, are the Grade 1 and Grade 2 star buildings. They're a very small percentage of the building stock in the country, and those buildings have been identified because they are particularly special. They demonstrate particular things, either building techniques or an association with a person, and so these buildings are special and they are worthy of care and attention.
There are more than 374,000 listed buildings in England, and more than 6,000 of them are in the celebrated Georgian city of Bath. But even in this World Heritage City, there is one architectural gem languishing on the list of the unloved. This is Cleveland Pools, the only surviving open-air Georgian pool in England. Wow. Here we are, Cleveland Pools, my first visit. It's not the easiest place to find, it has to be said, and the path down here is pretty treacherous, but when you get here, look at what you find, this lovely crescent. I suppose reflecting the great crescents in the city itself. And look at these, the changing rooms. Even got the numbers still above the doors, covered in years of paint. Arguably the wrong sort of paint, it's just not letting this building breathe at all. And this lovely bath stain is just flaking away. But even there, look, the hooks within the changing rooms themselves. But just imagine it. I mean, this opened in 1815. That's the same year as the Battle of Waterloo. And it was open then only to gentlemen bathers. Were they splashing around in here, discussing the battle, reading the newspaper of the day? This place has a great story to tell, and not just about Bath, but about our history as a nation of bathers. It follows a tradition that goes back to the days of the Romans, of course, with bathing in Bath. I mean, hence the name.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that is what we've said all the way through. I mean, it's the missing link in the whole history of Bath, with going back to Bledad and his pigs and the muddy puddle and the Romans, and right the way through history. It's just such a special place. It's such an individual place. If it was anywhere else in the country, I'm sure it would be more valued than in Bath, where we've got so many listed buildings. Not too many that are grade 2 star, but we've still got a lot.
And that perhaps is part of the problem, being in Bath. With so much history to celebrate, not every building can be a priority. It was built with private money, the great and the good coming together to create a community pool. By the 1960s, it had become a popular summer hangout. You can feel what it was like to be there. But in 1984, the council closed it down. No private plan was put forward to save it, and now Anne and her fellow trustees are looking to the community and the National Lottery for salvation.
Community pools do work. They maybe don't make a lot of money, but the business plan says it's feasible.
But what's it going to take to see this place come back to life? I mean, an awful lot of money.
An awful lot of money.
Any idea how much?
3 million-ish. I don't, and I mean prices go up.
Is it realistic to think you could achieve £3 million?
If we are successful with the Heritage Lottery bid, yes. And we have got a lot of community support.
But it takes more than just goodwill and enthusiasm. The Heritage Lottery Fund needs to see evidence not just of an historic value, but of a business plan that's viable in the 21st century. This place has an obvious purpose. It is a swimming pool. That makes its restoration relatively simple, but it also limits how it can make money. Today's entrepreneurs haven't seen a commercial opportunity worthy of their investment, so it needs to draw on some kind of public purse. And the Prince's Regeneration Trust are helping to do just that.
We all know these days that there aren't vast sums of public money to support these sorts of projects. They've really got to be viable from an economic point of view. This is unusual because actually the use for which it was originally built, which became redundant in the 1980s when we all thought we had to swim in pools with chlorine that were inside, has now come back because everybody loves open air swimming again. You couldn't just reopen it as it was in the 1960s, 1970s. It wasn't heated, for example. I don't think that would be viable now. So there are things you need to do to make it fit. It's about protecting the past but making it fit for the 21st century.
And that's the key here, keeping the essence of the pool but also using the space in new ways to make it viable.
There isn't another building like this or a facility like this in the United Kingdom. It's the only surviving outdoor Georgian open-air pool, and it's just amazing, and it deserves to have attention, it deserves to be saved.
Well, I for one would love to think that in a city that's founded its reputation on the history of baths and bathing going back to the Romans, that once again these pools here at Cleveland could have a future. But ensuring that future is going to be tricky. It's going to involve an awful lot of compromise and negotiation between all of those interested parties. Finding the money to do them up is one thing. Finding the money and the interest to make them a viable business concern, well, that's the other. But who knows, maybe 200 years to the day when they first opened, once again, they may echo to the sound of bathers enjoying themselves. It's going to take an awful lot of hard work. It's also got to stop raining. And here in Kingswood in South Gloucestershire is another project from the BBC restoration programme that desperately needs a brighter outlook. Well, here we are, the site of the Whitfield Tabernacle. A place of undoubted historic significance, and yet a decade on, not an awful lot seems to have happened. It was already in a desperate state when it featured on restoration in 2003.
Well, let's be honest, this isn't a picturesque ruin, this is now a bit of a mess.
But it's a mess of enormous historical value. It's regarded by many as one of the most important sites in the story of nonconformism. From 1741, these walls reverberated to the voice of George Whitfield, preaching the gospel to the common man. The site also contains a later church and churchyard, but it's the unassuming tabernacle building that is Grade 1 listed and clearly at risk. It's owned by a developer that specialises in restoration and reuse, but since 2010, the situation here has been deadlocked. There's now a legal dispute with the local council over who pays for emergency repairs. The council felt it would be inappropriate for them to talk to us. The developers feel the council needs to compromise.
One of the most important recipes for success, if you like, is to have all the interested parties around the table so you can have an open dialogue, understand their concerns and they can understand ours. And it's very, very difficult from our point of view to try and convince and get the local authority to understand the commercial reality.
Without an agreed plan for its use, neither private nor public money is likely to be easily available. And the local MP feels that English Heritage could do more to facilitate the most tricky restoration projects.
I think what we need to see is some form of new strategy where we actually say, out of the buildings that are at risk, what are the ones we definitely want to save, rather than just have everything as a general category. But also, I think with English Heritage, they need to be more flexible about actually the adaptations of the buildings, that you can't go back necessarily to the original stage, but if you want to keep these buildings, rather than them being exposed to the elements, let's make use of it in the modern day, and let's not worry too much about the exact historical recreation of these sites.
But even the most flexible approach may not be enough to save this.
It was 1867 when it opened, and to be quite honest with you, I don't think very much money's been spent on it since then.
This is Burnbeck Pier at Weston-super-Mare.
It's horrendous, it really is. It's in such a dire state. The legs, which are hollow cast iron, are still pretty strong, and they're good, and they're holding it up. But it's all the decking and the cross bracing underneath that needs sorting out. Time is very much against it. I mean, I have been trying down the years to try and see it saved. But I think it's now got to the stage where we really do need a miracle. And whether miracles happen or not, I don't know.
Of all the buildings on the at-risk register in the West, this is perhaps the one that English Heritage is most concerned about. Burnbeck Pier isn't just at risk, its situation is critical. What I find shocking is just how quickly it's fallen into this condition. How such a unique piece of coastal architecture has become a dangerous and crumbling wreck. It's the only pier in the UK to link the mainland to an island, and for years that island was one of Somerset's liveliest attractions. It welcomed ferry loads of pleasure seekers from across the Bristol Channel to enjoy its Victorian amusements, to promenade the decking. England's more relaxed Sunday drinking laws made it popular with visitors from Wales, but the last ferry sailed in 1979. It's been designated as a dangerous structure for almost 20 years.
The ideal scenario would be to have it restored.
In its glory, as we see it now. Yeah.
But let's bring an element of reality into this. It's all about money. We can't go back to what the pier was. That just won't make sense unless it's a totally charitably funded exercise. There would have to be some development on the island and perhaps on the landward side in order to create funding to keep the pier going once it's being built. The problem comes when the amount of development is so excessive that it detracts from the whole point of restoring the pier. It's about balance.
But getting that balance is proving almost impossible. It's always been privately owned, so restoring it really is an issue for its owners. But it's now become so derelict that it's become an issue for the whole town. There have been many different proposals for its redevelopment, but none so far has won planning approval. Current owners Urban Splash are confident that a new developer with new plans could take it off their hands and make the pier work, but the local planners haven't yet given the go-ahead.
What you would end up doing is handing over land to a developer, which, if the pier were not here, would not have a hope in hell of getting planning permission. If in trying to restore the pier you destroy it by the amount of development around it, it still begs that question, what have you achieved at the end of the day?
But in wanting to achieve something, there's a real risk of achieving nothing at all. Burnbeck could easily disappear, and Weston's already lost one pier. When the pavilion of the Grand Pier was destroyed by fire in 2008, it had a huge impact on the seaside resort, financially and emotionally. But it wasn't just rebuilt as it was. The owners worked with planners and asked the public to choose the designs. So can they see a future for Burnbeck?
It would take millions to actually get the structure ready for anything on top, and I think that's the biggest problem. I mean, if you said 20 million, I don't know if that would be enough. If you said 30 million, I don't know if that would be enough.
Can you see a future for Burnbeck?
In its current state, if I'm honest, probably not. I mean, unless it's going over to community ownership and that they can apply, you know, the community can apply for some lottery funding, I can't see any investor wanting to do anything with it that would be commercially viable.
The more I've learned about the plight of Burnbeck Pier, the more tragic the story has become. It's been marooned in decades of indecision as to its future. On the one hand, the plans and ideas of successive developers, and on the other, the doubts and concerns of the local authority. But clearly some kind of compromise needs to be found, because if it isn't, well, this wonderful historic structure will simply slip into the sea. And that would be a tragedy not just for Weston, but also for the history of the region as a whole.
The will is out there to see it saved.
But if we can't foresee a commercial future for it, although it's a lovely romantic ideal to preserve it as a piece of history, it's just not realistic.
Quite possibly not. But I don't really like saying that.
We are stuck in a place that says, yes, we want to keep it, but we haven't got a plan.
No, we haven't got a plan. I don't have the money to do it. I wish I did have. It would be a crying shame to see it go, but possibly that's maybe what will happen.
I mean, we live in a wonderful country. We're surrounded by our history. But you know, where do we stop? Do we restore every monastery which was pulled down by Henry VIII, every castle which was pulled down by Cromwell? Some parts of our history have to be allowed to slip into terminal decline, and that decline is itself part of history. So you go to the great monasteries which are ruins, and the ruin is the history as much as the building is the history. Perhaps, I don't know because I can't predict the future, but perhaps this is going that way.
You know, when it comes to restoring our heritage, one thing is becoming absolutely clear. The bigger the project, the bigger the challenges, but getting everybody to agree as to what the vision for that particular project should be can be almost impossible. What they really need to make them work, to make them viable, is a good dose of realism, of pragmatism, and above all else, compromise. And that's very much what's happened here in the Dorset market town of Sherborne. This is Sherborne House, a picture-perfect Palladian facade, but its real treasure is inside. These murals are the work of Sir James Thornhill, known for pieces at Hampton Court, Blenheim Palace and St Paul's Cathedral, but this was a private commission. Their slow deterioration is the main reason that Sherborne House has been on the at-risk register for more than a decade. But now they've been restored.
There was quite considerable paint loss, and the paintings were very dusty, very dirty. There was some quite urgent remedial treatment that needed doing.
Claire, where do you start with a project like this one?
In terms of the painting, you start at the top and you work down. That's how you approach conservation projects. You really get an understanding. You see the individual brush strokes. As you're cleaning, you can see the underdrawing. You can see where he's made little adjustments or he's changed a certain position. You feel the working artist through these paintings. They are nationally significant because they are a personal work towards the end of Thornhill's life, and Thornhill was an incredibly important artist, and these paintings are important because he is the artist.
So the murals have been restored and the house is now clearly well on its way, but this hasn't been achieved because of the intrinsic historic value of Sherborne House itself. It's got a lot more to do with the value of the land upon which it sits. In order to restore one house, well, they set about building a whole load more.
Tucked away around the back is a new development. 44 homes built privately as part of a deal that saved Sherborne House for future generations. The developers will pay to restore not just the murals, but the whole of the main house, which will then be used as office space.
We had a building that was deteriorating before our eyes. You know, we couldn't let it go on. And in the current climate, of course, the local authority doesn't have the funds to restore it itself. So therefore there's this imperative to do something. We can't just be a museum preserved forever. We have to be pragmatic about this. But we've preserved the key things. The fantastic Thornhill mural has been restored. The building itself is a great landmark.
You all want the same thing at the end of the day. You want to produce something that's worthwhile and of value and that you've got tremendous pride in. It's about a sense of achievement. I'd perhaps put it too highly, but certainly everyone who's worked on the new build scheme and on the refurbishment of the house have all taken a tremendous pride in it.
There are many occasions when planning authorities have been very, very rigid, and that's simply not acceptable these days. I think you've got to be realistic, and there will be a tension between developers and planners and the conservation bodies like English Heritage, but if you get together with a common vision, there is usually a way forward.
What's been done here isn't an option for every site, but by compromising and prioritising, Sherborne has been given a new lease of life. In a secluded valley 6 miles south of Stroud, this is Woodchester Mansion, the architectural adventure of one William Lee.
Now, on the face of it, Woodchester Mansion is a wonderful example of Gothic Revival architecture at its best. And on the inside, you might expect to find all the usual trappings of a wonderful and sumptuous manorial home. But what makes this so exciting for me is the fact that it was never finished.
It was 1852 when Lee commissioned 21-year-old architect Benjamin Bucknell to design his new home. But he was selling land to finance the project. And when the land and the money ran out, work here just stopped.
Well, this really is a treat. I see plenty of derelict buildings on my travels, but nothing quite prepared me for this lot. Because this is an 1850s building site, and the builders have just got up and walked away, but they've left behind all the clues as to how they go about building a structure like this. Look at it in its unfinished glory. And look at that, that's amazing. Above my head, the original timber former for that Gothic arch, still here. The timber scaffolding, still here. It's old technology in many respects, but here it is, preserved as a moment in time, the moment when the builders simply gave up and walked away. That is what makes this building so important.
As awful as it is for the family that it wasn't finished, it's left us with a real gem and something for us to be custodians of and share with the people of Gloucestershire and, you know, obviously the country as a whole, and that people can come and experience this amazing building.
It's like looking at a skeleton. The way architects work, the way craftsmen work, it's all revealed there. You can see how the engineering works and how the design works. I'm not a person who finds it difficult to sleep, but one of the few things which has kept me awake at night is Woodchester Mansion.
And this is what gives Terry sleepless nights, Woodchester's Chapel. It's this part of the mansion that's most at risk, held up inside and out by scaffolding. It is the heart of the building, a central place of worship built for a very devout man. It's the most complete part of Woodchester and the most precarious.
It's a huge monetary job, but it isn't a huge technical job. The main thing is we've just got to keep the rain out.
Yeah.
And then the place will stop rotting. But you know, it gets wet every winter, it gets cold every winter. So you know, at certain points of the building, the stone is continually perishing.
The team are looking for a Heritage Lottery grant, but they're not just waiting around until they get one. It is already open to the public and for private events. The Trust is working with the National Trust, who own the land around the mansion, and a partnership has been formed with the City of Bath College for young students to learn traditional crafts and stonemasonry, working on a real-life project.
How are we doing, lads? Look at this. Yeah. So how long have you both been learning the craft for?
About a year and a half now.
I mean, these blocks are going to go back into the building, aren't they?
Yeah, we're going to put them right there.
In this corner here?
Yeah, in this
oh,
corner
I see,
here,
so that's going to go right there?
Yeah, these are the last two to go in the top there.
What's happening at Woodchester is a great example of flexibility, creativity and open-mindedness. And it's already bringing in some revenue.
If you want to get an income stream and you want your project to be relevant to people, you can't just be led by your own preconceptions about what's the point of this place, what's appropriate to this place. You have to talk to people and understand their aspirations for how the building could be made to work for them. We plough on into the future blind and stupid if we don't learn from our history. And if you sweep away the past, your sense of where you are, who you are, and how your community fits together is that much weaker.
There are undoubted obstacles facing our most endangered buildings at a time when money clearly is in short supply. But what I have seen is a citizen army more than prepared to take on the challenges and responsibilities of restoring England's heritage.
In Bridgewater, the curious concrete castle is close to standing on its own. The injection of capital into Castle House should help it to finally come off the at-risk register. And I've seen how at Cleveland Pools, the support of a major charitable trust is giving local campaigners hope and expertise. But I've also seen how some buildings have been left to languish for so long that there's almost now no viable way to bring them back into use.
The key is partnership and to get people talking. It's very difficult if you're just one person trying to save a building, and you really need to build a partnership and get a groundswell of enthusiasm behind the building.
Restoration projects also need a strong sense of reality, a viable business plan, and if a new way of using a building can generate revenue, then the investment in our heritage could well be an investment in the future.
In this country, we're incredibly lucky. We have a wonderful range of heritage and enormously diverse. But it's also about creating new economic opportunities as well. And I really strongly believe that heritage can be a driver of our economy. It is a basis on which you can create jobs.
But there is one more thing that is vital to the success of any restoration project, and that, of course, is the support of the local community. History, after all, is the story of people. It's that helps forge our national identity. And I, for one, am certain that it's only by understanding and valuing the lessons of the past can we really ever hope to shape our future.